David, you and I should be sitting up here wearing a pair of yokes, although maybe this is your yoke today.
Yes, maybe better. You are correct. In light of today's reading from the book of Jeremiah, Wilson, that you read for us, it would indeed be appropriate for the two of us to be wearing wooden yokes like an ox might wear. But for the sake of my physical comfort, I'm happy that we're not.
Does that make us both Jeremiah then? No Hananiah here?
Well, I think there's a little bit of Jeremiah and Hananiah in all of us.
Please do try not to drop dead before the end of the sermon.
I'll do my best. So that reading featured a debate between the prophets Hananiah and Jeremiah. That's a very momentous and painful debate because it took place during one of the darkest points in the whole Old Testament story. At this time, the kingdom of Judah and its capital, Jerusalem, lived under the dominance of the Babylonian Empire, who had stolen away many of the treasures in the temple in Jerusalem and had taken King Jeconiah and many other people of the kingdom into exile. And you can bet that the people of Judah wanted to change this status quo, but what could they do? They knew full well that if they rebelled, the Babylonians would just send another army and things would get even worse.
The royal court in Jerusalem has these two competing prophets, Jeremiah and Hananiah. We can think about prophets in the Old Testament as messengers. These are people who receive a word from God and then communicate it to God's people. These two prophets are obviously hearing two incompatible messages from God. Jeremiah is convinced that Judah and many other nations will be under the yoke of the Babylonians for quite some time. God has told Jeremiah to go around wearing a wooden yoke as a symbol of Judah's submission. But Hananiah insists that within 2 years, God will break the yoke of the Babylonians. The Babylonians will give back the treasures they stole from the temple. King Jeconiah and the exiles will come home, and all nations will be free.
That would be great, if it were true.
Yeah, that's what Jeremiah says. He tells Hananiah, I hope you're right. I pray that you are, because I long for all of us to be free. But lots of prophets before us have prophesied war, famine, and plague. If a prophet speaks about prosperity and peace, well, we will know that that prophet was sent by God only when those prophets' words come true. Hananiah will not be swayed. He takes the yoke off Jeremiah's neck and smashes it.
We might laugh at Hananiah. After all, his prophecy that the Babylonians will be defeated and graciously return the treasures of the temple, that sounds absurd. And spoiler alert, a couple years after this debate, the Babylonian army does indeed return and brutally sacks Jerusalem, destroying the temple and carrying off many of the people into exile once more. But although Hananiah's prophecy turns out not to be true, I kind of can understand why he makes it. From Hananiah's perspective, God will never let anything bad happen to the temple in Jerusalem. So, in that sense, it makes sense why Hananiah would make this prophecy.
When I try to imagine what's in Hananiah's mind and heart, I see him wanting and expecting God to fix things. God will swoop in, throw a few lightning bolts around, and send the Babylonians packing for good. Sometimes God does work like that. Perhaps God has worked like that in Hananiah's life up to now. But that's not the only way God is at work in the world. I would say that's not even the primary way God is at work in the world. Jeremiah seems to understand that God will not always stop bad things from happening. God will not always prevent those bad things from affecting us. Bad things are an inevitable part of this messed up human life. In fact, sometimes God calls us into painful, difficult things because that is where God needs us to be to do God's work in the world. And God gives us what we need to be faithful through those difficult things.
I hear that, and I think Hananiah, though, has a hard time getting that. I think Hananiah doesn't want to experience suffering, which I resonate with. And because of that, Hananiah thinks that the only thing God can do in this situation is just to fix things, which means that Hananiah can hardly even imagine God being present while suffering is occurring. And I can relate to that. At times in my life, I have struggled with depression and anxiety, although therapy and medication and prayer have helped me a lot over the years. But there's been a few times in my life when I felt down, when I've had a hard time imagining that God could be present at all. And in those situations, I've occasionally isolated myself. So as a result, one of my most treasured memories is when a good friend of mine noticed that I was feeling down and said, "Hey, David, get your butt down here and hang out with us." And that forceful invitation was wonderful. It helped me see that I didn't have to wait for God to fix everything, but that God would be there with me when suffering was occurring.
It sounds like your friend was a prophet for you.
Yes, I'd not thought about it that way before, but that is true. Thanks. I'll have to tell her. But I wonder, though, Gia, if you have ever experienced God calling you into something uncomfortable.
Oh, yes. I felt and still feel strongly called to be the rector of St. John's. When I interviewed here in the fall and winter of 2019, I kept telling myself this was never going to work out. And the Holy Spirit kept making a way where there was no way. Many of you know the next part of the story. We moved into our house in Clintonville on March 15th, 2020, which was the last day that St. John's held services in the nave for the next 16 months. I had so much to figure out that first year, from getting to know this new community over Zoom, to live streaming services, which we'd never done before, to keeping up with the constantly changing public health recommendations. I had only a little time to be angry with God for calling me to this great new church that was nothing like I had expected it to be. It helped that all of us were going through COVID at the same time. God was not going to swoop in and save me from this global pandemic because we were all going through the global pandemic. What I could see only in hindsight was how present God was, mostly in the people around me. We were in this together. And the way people here kept showing up again and again through those terribly difficult months helped keep me reminded, helped showing me that God was here and that this was exactly where God needed me to be.
You know, I interviewed to possibly come here to St. John's a year and a half after you started. And I remember when I was talking with you and the committee of parishioners who were helping you hire an associate, I could really tell how joyful and centered you all were. So clearly God had been with you all during those tricky 18 months. And I think it's interesting that God has called us both into uncomfortable situations, calling me to spend time with friends when I didn't want to, calling you to serve at St. John's in that pandemic time. I bet we could both think of many other examples.
Oh, yes.
And I think that's typical of God, right? Our God is not kind of a fanciful God who we might imagine might just fix something, but instead, God is a God who joins us in the muck of complicated daily life and calls us to bring love, to bring God's love into that muck. And like you said, that means often when we're in the middle of muck, that's exactly where God is calling us to be.
Yeah, I think that's Jeremiah's point. Where Hananiah looks to God's presence in the temple, Jeremiah is much more focused on the covenant between God and Judah. Judah is God's people, and God is their God, no matter what. That covenant is unbreakable. However Judah has let God down, whatever Judah is going through, whether it's conquest or famine or pandemic, God is always faithful. God is with them in the muck of this messy human world.
And so that means that Jeremiah is not saying, oh, just resign yourselves to living under Babylonian domination. No, God brings healing and hope into the muck. So, elsewhere in the book of Jeremiah, Jeremiah prophesies that Babylon will fall one day. And in fact, in one part of the book, which I know you really like a lot, Jeremiah buys a field in the middle of the kingdom of Judah and makes sure to obtain the official deed of purchase for that field, and then places that deed into an earthenware jar so that that deed of purchase will outlast the dominance of the Babylonian Empire, and that Jeremiah's ancestor, no, the other way around, descendant, will have that field after the Babylonian Empire is defeated. It's like Jeremiah is saying, resist Babylon, but be smart about it, and I'm with you.
I love that part of Jeremiah's story, this profound hope for a better future expressed in paperwork. When we picture Jeremiah wearing his yoke, we probably imagine a yoke for one ox. More likely, though, it was a yoke for a team of 2 oxen. Because God is with us in the yoke, struggling and striving alongside us. So Jesus reminds us when he says, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. God is in the yoke with us, faithful no matter what.